I like to use a mental health professional in this role because I think they are really good at helping the parties identify this issue has emotional underpinnings that we need to work through as opposed to it's a legal issue. I mean, I can tell you what the statute is, but sometimes people want things for emotional reasons, and they can be really good at helping the parties navigate that. And then the parties agree, we are not going to go to court. We are going to solve this ourselves.
Welcome to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. I'm your host, attorney and mediator Cary Jacobson. Each week, we bring you practical guidance, real conversations, and expert insights to help you navigate divorce with clarity, confidence, and less conflict. If you're ready for a calmer, more empowered path forward, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast, where we help families move through divorce with clarity, compassion, and far less conflict. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson, attorney and mediator with Jacobson Family Law. And today we're talking about an approach to divorce that aligns perfectly with our mission here, which is collaborative divorce. This process focuses on cooperation, transparency, and problem solving instead of those litigated courtroom battles. I'm thrilled to be joined by Katelyn Parker, a Colorado family law attorney trained in collaborative divorce, who helps her clients create a roadmap for a peaceful, healthy future by working with a team of professionals who support both the legal and non-legal needs in the divorce process. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Cary, for having me.
Before we kind of dive into the collaborative divorce and explaining what that is, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey, your background, how you became a family law attorney, and your particular approach?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I like to say that family law found me because in law school, I said, I'm not touching family law with a 10-foot pole. Sounds terrible. And the first firm I worked at, I was doing general litigation. So did a mix of kind of everything and found myself actually really drawn to the family law, which was surprising to me. I think I liked the human element of it.
Right.
And I was surprised by how many clients came into the office needing a divorce, needing a child custody arrangement, but also saying, I'm nervous to hire a lawyer because I don't want this to become my neighbor's horror story that I've heard. And then a couple years into practice, I found collaborative divorce, and it was like the light bulb went off and I went, oh, these are my people. This is what I've been looking for. So did the training. I'm in a practice group with other professionals, and I've just seen the way that process helps people come out better on the other side than litigating in the courtroom. So that's how I ended up in family law.
Well, we all know that any solution is better than litigation.
Absolutely.
I don't think many people understand the term collaborative divorce and what it really is. And I get questioned all the time about, well, how is it really different than mediation or anything like that? So can you share with our listeners how it's different?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think collaborative divorce still feels new here in Colorado. We just had our collaborative statute passed, I think it was 2 years ago. So same, I get lots of questions. The big difference that I like to tell people, there's a couple of them. One is it's really a team approach. So we have a neutral, we call it a facilitator in Colorado. I like to use a mental health professional in this role because I think they are really good at helping the parties identify this issue has emotional underpinnings that we need to work through as opposed to it's a legal issue. I mean, I can tell you what the statute is, but sometimes people want things for emotional reasons, and they can be really good at helping the parties navigate that. And then the parties agree, we are not going to go to court. We are going to solve this ourselves. And if we fall out of the collaborative process, then we have to get new attorneys. So it kind of incentivizes them to stay in. Although I will say most of the cases I've done, quote unquote, collaboratively, we actually didn't sign the official agreement with the disqualification and they stayed in it and we solved it. And I think that doesn't always happen, but I think if you have two parties that are really motivated, you can stay in it even without that.
Absolutely. We often refer to it as collaborative with the big C, as like the official process.
Yes. Yeah. Big C collaborative, or I've also heard, I have some colleagues who call not an official formal collaborative, a cooperative divorce. So yeah, I usually walk parties through, look, there's lots of ways we can do this. It's not just an either or. And even if you're litigating, I still try to bring those principles into that practice. Right. And so prepping the client for mediation, kind of walking them through. I tell them all the time, I'm going to often evaluate a settlement in terms of, could we do better in court? Do I think there's a chance we could do better in court? There's lots of different ways to negotiate and reasons to go to court versus not. And so at the end of the day, you as the client have to weigh, what can I live with? What's my best case scenario? And I think sometimes talking through that with clients, even in a litigated setting, can help them get clarity.
Right. Absolutely. So we also do collaborative divorce in our office, though I will say it's not a huge part of our practice. You were talking about like the team and the team makeup. So we also typically use mental health professionals as the coaches in the process.
Yes.
Every kind of group has a different practice method. Some people will use one coach to work with both parties, especially if they have minor children, that sort of thing. And yes, because the coaches will work with them on putting together the parenting plan. And then in other scenarios, they're very strong on having two coaches, one coach for each individual.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Just to say that there's a variety of how the collaborative team can look depending on who the players are.
Yes. Okay. Well, and I haven't seen that where they've done two coaches. I've seen it before where maybe you have the, facilitator who's helping the parties negotiate, almost like a mediator. I would say a mediator plus. And then you may have somebody who has a divorce coach personally as well. But yeah, I hadn't seen the two coaches, I really like that about collaborative, that it's very flexible and we can pick and choose who we need based on this family's needs.
That is the lovely part about it, is like, depending on what their family makeup is and what the issues are that need to be dealt with, there are professionals that can be involved.
Right.
Do you typically have scenarios where you're bringing in financial professionals as well?
Yes, we typically have one financial professional and they work with both parties. They gather, we've got pretty extensive financial disclosures in Colorado, so they will help the parties gather all of that. And then they'll do a spreadsheet and start kind of running scenarios on the spreadsheet of, okay, if you keep this house and she keeps this house, what does that look like? And then they're involved. And I really love that because I can do all of that. But then when it gets to the nitty gritty of talking about capital gains and tax effects and, different retirement accounts being pre-tax or post-tax, that's where my eyes start to glaze over. So I'm always very glad to have them on board.
Absolutely. It is helpful to have those financial professionals involved, whether it's in the collaborative setting or mediation or whatever the case may be.
Yes, absolutely.
As you mentioned, one of the defining features of collaborative is that team approach. Can you explain a little bit about who's typically involved? We talked a little bit about some of the roles, but who else, what other professionals can be involved depending on scenario, and what the benefits are to the clients for those folks coming in?
I think all the collaborative ones I've done, we've just stuck with this standard team of a facilitator and a financial person. I know that you can also get, if there's concerns about abuse or unhealthy or toxic relationships, you can get a child advocate involved. So in Colorado, we have a child and family investigator who can kind of go in, they'll interview both parents, talk to them. We also have a child's legal representative who represents the best interests of the child. And so you can have somebody, you could probably mix those two roles a little bit in a collaborative setting more than you can in the litigated setting. Or if you need some sort of therapy between a parent and child or some family therapy, you can add a therapist to the mix. So those are generally the ones I think of. I guess on the financial side, you'd have business valuators. I had a colleague who did a case where there was, I want to say $100 million in crypto. I mean, it was a stunning amount of crypto. And they had someone who was able to go through an inventory. Thankfully, I have not had a lot of the cases where I've had crypto. It's been very minimal, but I understand that it can be really hard to track down. And so making sure that you're inventorying it, valuing it appropriately, or if one person owns a business, you can have someone come in and value the business.
Absolutely. We've had a scenario where we've had a neutral valuator, and it's definitely so much more helpful.
Sure.
Especially when, one of the things that I see is if you had gone to litigation, each party would have been hiring these experts.
Absolutely.
At first blush, it sounds expensive, because you had all of these professionals involved.
Right.
But when you really compare it to the alternative, it's going to almost be half the cost in some respects because you're not hiring multiple competing experts.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And I think attorneys' fees are generally, I think the fees may be, similar or half, but the attorney's fees portion are actually going to be lower because in these types of cases, I find I'm typically just providing legal advice. I had a situation a couple of years ago where the issue was husband had used some inheritance to pay off wife's student loans during the marriage, and they had a marital agreement that said she would repay him that amount if they got divorced. And then we're trying to figure out, okay, is it the full amount he repaid? Is it just the principal amount that he paid off? And, I said to him, I think that a court would probably enforce the full amount you paid based on this marital agreement. Going to court is always iffy. You don't know what a judge is going to do or what evidence will come out. I said, but to me, this feels more of like, this is something that you and her need to come to an agreement on and understand the reasonings why you want this inheritance back and why she's complaining about paying back interest. And they went and met with actually the therapist that was the facilitator to discuss it, and actually came out of that meeting saying, actually, we think we're going to stay married and we're going to give this another try. And it has been 2 or 3 years now. And every time I tell this story, I find some wood to knock on because I have not heard from them. And so I think, sometimes there are those, yes, it's a legal issue. What did the marital agreement mean? But the reasons why you're asking for this have an emotional and a very human side to them. And if we can recognize that and give the parties space, I think it's hugely helpful to them.
Absolutely. Because there is, for every legal answer, there is the non-legal answer, right?
Yes,
like this is what the law says, but that is not necessarily what is the right thing or should be the thing that, underlying it needs to be done. From your experience, how does the collaborative approach impact clients emotionally and financially compared to litigation?
Sure. I think it's a huge impact. I don't think people realize how emotionally taxing litigation is. Years ago, when I was at my old firm, I had a personal injury client who had broken her femur, and she ended up with a 6-figure settlement at the end of the case and looked at me as I gave her the check and said, if I had known how hard litigation was going to be, I wouldn't have done this. She wasn't upset with the outcome. She just recognized this money can only do so much.
Right.
And the stress of being deposed and, having court deadlines and having to provide information was so much. And I tell that story to clients all the time and say, if you think it looks stressful on TV, it's far more stressful to actually live it. And that needs to be a consideration when you're deciding whether to go to court or not. And not that we say, oh, you should just avoid the stress and not go to court and just take whatever they give you. But I think that is something that needs to be considered. I also think collaborative sets them up really well to co-parent, especially if they have kids, to co-parent after the divorce. I tell clients all the time, my goal is that you guys can sit together at your kids' high school and college graduations and weddings and major life events, and your kid is not worried about where am I going to put mom on the seating chart and where am I going to put dad, or, you guys having, I want to promote you guys being able to continue to raise your kids. And I think that it also helps clients really look forward into the future because we're asking questions about what do you want your life to look like 5 years from now? Where are you living? What job do you have? And so it helps them start to paint a picture, especially if it's someone who didn't want the divorce and who is saying, I've had several stay-at-home mom clients who are really struggling with the fact that they may have to work now. And so I think if you can help them navigate the grief of that and the loss of what they had and set them up for, what can I look forward to? What can I dream about in the future? I think that really helps jumpstart the healing process, and we're starting it earlier rather than kind of holding our breath until the litigation is done.
Absolutely. There's so much that you shared there. I agree that when using collaborative, it does put them in such a better position to be able to co-parent. Because if you're going through this process in litigation and you have kids together, right? If you've made it all the way to a trial, then you're up there on the stand, basically talking about all the reasons why the other parent is not fit to have custody of some sort, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And now you're walking away after a judge has made a decision, which neither of you are going to be happy about.
Right.
And then you're expected to co-parent with one another. And it's like, how does that even work? Right. Then the kids are so far in the middle of all of that.
Right. Yes.
And just like you said, really the goal for us as practitioners is, can we get you to the other side where you can have a cordial co-parenting relationship where the kids don't feel like they have to pick?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's becoming more widely known. It's really the conflict that impacts the kids more than the fact of the divorce. And so I tell clients that all the time. Look, I know that you're worried about your kids. The good news is you have lots of control over that. You don't have control over what the other party does, but you have control over how you contribute to conflict or lack thereof.
Absolutely. So what types of clients or situations do you typically find are the better fit for the collaborative process?
Sure. The ones that I have done collaboratively thus far, the parties have been pretty amicable at the start, and both of them have been very committed to staying out of court. I do think it's a common misconception that you have to be getting along to do collaborative. I think you can do collaborative even if there is conflict or certain abuse allegations. I think those you kind of have to take case by case. But I would say usually it's a commitment on both sides that we're going to do what is best for our kids and we're going to solve this ourselves. And that doesn't mean that it's easy. There's various sticking points. And I've had a couple where, dragged on a little bit longer than they otherwise might have because you don't have the court deadlines. But if you have parties who are saying, we are committed to this. And even I've had a couple where the party on the other side was the reluctant one who didn't really want to get divorced. And yet they were willing to come to the table and say, okay, this is happening. It has to, I think the process gives a little bit of time there too, for them to deal with that grief and come to the conclusion of, okay, putting out the anchor, taking weeks and weeks to get information to them is not actually going to stop this process. It's still going to go forward, but we can do this in a way that is respectful for everybody.
Right. Like even if I am not necessarily advocating or wanting this divorce.
Yes.
If it's going to happen, how can we do it in the most beneficial way?
Right. Yes.
For me, when I'm looking at, deciding whether or not to refer someone to collaborative versus mediation or some other alternative dispute resolution, I'm generally looking for those scenarios where that individual or couple, one of the individuals needs a bit more support.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yes.
Whether that's because of a mental health condition or, some sort of mental health component there because we have the mental health professionals involved.
Sure.
I think it's extremely helpful.
Absolutely.
Dealing with a client that may have a mental health issue. But if there's substance abuse on either side or allegations of substance abuse.
Sure. Yes.
And then the other time that I see it, when I recommend it is if the parties have very young children.
Yes.
It's like 3 and under.
Yes.
That a traditional schedule isn't going to work for.
Yes. Because you can be really creative. And I think then having the input from either a parent coach or just the mental health professional in the case on, more frequent contact or, this is what will be most helpful in the bonding and attachment piece. Yes. Is very beneficial.
Yeah. And generally, I find that if it's coming from the professionals, it helps the parents understand a bit more the child development reasons for those types of schedules.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, If those are scenarios, then I definitely recommend collaborative. If they're not quite in that world, then, I may recommend more on the mediation side, depending on what type of support they're looking for.
And when you're deciding to refer between those two options, are you looking at it as representing one of them in mediation, or you would be the mediator and they would be unrepresented?
It could be either, depending on the particular scenario. So,
okay.
Because, it depends on their situation and whether or not they feel that they can advocate for themselves in mediation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that could be the other scenario where collaborative can be helpful. They feel like they need the team support to be able to advocate for themselves instead of being the one to feel like, I'm just going to give in to anything the other person asks of me.
Right. Yes. Or especially if there's been a power imbalance in the relationship and they're needing some shoring up to, maybe they're finding their voice, but they're still like, I was on the phone with a client this past week and we've done mediation a couple of different times at different points. And she is learning now to advocate for herself, but there's still a little bit of like, am I the crazy one for thinking that this is a reasonable schedule? I'm like, no, you're not the crazy one here.
Are there situations where you find collaborative is not the most appropriate?
Not generally in my practice, and that's partly because I'm generally geared away from the very high conflict litigated divorces anyway. But I would say probably the one scenario would be if somebody calls in and I just get a sense that they really want the fight, they enjoy the fight, they're wanting a bulldog, kind of the stereotypical what people think of as a divorce attorney. And so generally in that scenario, I'm not going to suggest collaborative. And generally, I'm also referring them elsewhere because I can do that. I can file a motion if a motion needs to be filed. I can litigate. I don't enjoy it. And my bent is always going to be, how can we problem solve this? Right. And so I think when you have that mismatch there of, the client is always going to be wanting a more aggressive position. So actually, typically when they say, I want an aggressive attorney, usually that's my cue of you're looking for the standard, traditional litigated divorce kind of scenario. And sometimes depending on how they're positioned, maybe I'll mention it. But those are generally the scenarios where it's like, you're probably not going to fit in collaborative.
What are some common misconceptions that you hear about collaborative, if you hear anything about collaborative at all?
Sure. Yeah. I think what I hear mostly is most people are not familiar with it, or they've heard it, but they don't fully understand what it means. But I do think, there is a common misconception. You referenced it earlier that it could be more expensive because it is a team. The collaborative cases on my end are generally lower fees for me, but it's a little bit harder to track because you do have the other professional fees.
Right.
But what I tell clients is, first of all, we're getting experts who are specialized in their area. So the mental health professional, the one I use frequently, gives me almost a finalized draft of a parenting plan. And the client is just asking questions as they're negotiating. And same with the financial. Usually I will get a spreadsheet that says, hey, this is what we're thinking about. And then I just convert it into the court form. And their rates are generally lower and you're splitting it between the two of you. So like you said, it's going to be about half. I also think it reduces the likelihood that you're going to have to come back later on because you have multiple people. You have the financial person saying, think about capital gains taxes. And if those are owed when you sell the house, what are we doing with that? As opposed to, at this point in my career, I like to think I'm catching things like that. Sometimes you don't. And so then it comes back and you're like, oh, right, we should have thought about capital gains. So I think you're heading off issues ahead of time, even things like, say you have a 12-year-old, you may not be thinking yet about a car or a cell phone, but making sure you include those now while you guys are on the same page, I think is hugely helpful. And then when they're 16, you're not looking at this going, who's going to pay for the car? And now you're back in the attorney's office arguing about it. That's one. I think another one could be, people feel like maybe I would be better protected if I go to court because my lawyer is going to be advocating for the most I can get under the law. And I actually tell people, you actually have more control in the collaborative setting. You can be more creative. You can structure things. You can do a parenting plan. I had a client years ago who I think they were switching every day because they had a 2-year-old.
Right.
And I remembered thinking, this sounds like a nightmare. I would not want to do this. But they really wanted to make sure that both of them had lots of contact with the child, which I think is also developmentally appropriate. So you can be creative, whereas a judge may say, I'm not going to force you to do an exchange every day.
Absolutely. And yes, your attorney may be able to get what's owed to you under the law. But as you mentioned,
yes,
there are so many things that you can do that it's over and beyond what a court could do.
Yes.
If you work it out yourself.
Yes. And, I tell people a lot of times, as a lawyer, I have a hammer in my toolbox. I have some other things, but a lot of times it feels like what you really need here is a wrench or a screwdriver. And so if we go to court, I can use my hammer, but it's not going to get the same results or outcome as if we, can be creative here.
Absolutely. Katelyn, thank you so much for sharing your insight and helping our listeners understand that divorce doesn't have to be destructive to be effective.
Absolutely. Yes.
For those listening who are considering divorce and want a process that supports dignity, communication, and the long-term family health, collaborative divorce may be an option worth exploring. Can you share how people can find out more about you and your services?
Absolutely. Yes. So my website is just oneaccord.legal. So you can find me there. I am only licensed in Colorado, so I can only help Colorado folks. But then I'm also a member of South Denver Collaborative Divorce Professionals. I know that's a mouthful. And we have a website where the whole team, so we've got a mental health professional, a divorce coach, financial, legal. We try to post blog posts once a month. You can see all of our bios, kind of see the teams that we work together with. So that's a great way to find out more information generally about collaborative as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to include your contact information in the show notes. And as always, if you as a listener need legal advice, mediation, or support navigating divorce with less conflict, be sure to check out our website at jacobsonfamilylaw.com. And thank you for listening to Drama Free Divorce Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Drama Free Divorce Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. For more resources or to work with us, visit jacobsonfamilylaw.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay informed, and stay drama-free.